Hi everyone, welcome back to Rock Travels. This video is all about the positive news around international travel and the future of it. We have had some bad news overnight with the fact that international holidays may be postponed from May 17th till July the 1st. However, there is still a lot of good news to share around our situation and the rest of the world as well. I'm a big believer in being optimistic yet realistic, so I'm going to try to make sure that I'm not biased and the information is as accurate as it can be. It is very time sensitive naturally due to the nature of everything that's going on. I guess the main way to explain what the video is about is the fact that I'm going to speculate, assume and predict the future of international travel based on the information that's available to me. Before I begin, it would mean a great deal to me if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel and click the bell if you want to be notified for when I make new videos. So we'll start with the current situation in the UK. The news seems to change every day. I think the overall situation is pretty good with the fact that deaths, cases, infection rates are all so much lower than they were before, with an all-time low since October reporting about 17 deaths the other day. So as much as every life counts, it's a lot better than the situation it was some months ago. And that should only improve with the vaccine drive and the cautious removal of restrictions through the rest of the year. Obviously things are all subject to change, but the current roadmap does suggest that the 21st of June, at least the vast majority of restrictions will be lifted bar one or two. So fingers crossed for that. I think that does definitely give us light at the end of the tunnel. To think that 3 months we could be out of this on our home soil would definitely mean the world of good to everyone that lives here. So as far as I understood it, there was going to be a review on April the 5th or 12th regarding the international travel measures, which were meant to be at least relieved to some extent on May 17th. Tonight we've actually discovered that that may be slightly delayed from May 17th to July 1st. But even if it is July 1st as opposed to May 17th, that's only another 6 weeks away from that original date and only another few months from where we are now, so it's not that far away. I guess when we get headlines like this, it definitely does affect everyone's mental health and their overall outlook and perspective on the situation in the coming months. However, the positive amongst that is the fact that over the weekend we had our 3 consecutive highest days of vaccines administered, with a top of about 850,000 vaccines on one day, and we're ever so close to approaching the 30 million jabs milestone for the country, which is over half of the people in the country. Using another case study of Israel, if you see in this picture here that I found on Twitter, their vaccine drive has been very successful like ours, even better arguably, and you can see that their death rate, their infection rate and their cases are driving down every day, so we can definitely expect to see that in greater depth as the weeks go by and vaccines are administered. So if you know me well enough or you follow the channel, you'll know that I've been looking to get away for long term for a very long time as well. I started thinking about going away almost permanently in 2019, front end of 2020, and a year has passed and I have gone approximately nowhere. So like I say, all about optimism and realism. My overall target is to leave the country towards the end of the year, September, October time, which you'll see why it's that time period later in the video. However, it's not all about me. I want to talk about you guys and what you can expect in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. So without further ado, let's think about the countries I think we can familiarise ourselves with at some point in the not too distant future. So quick warning, obviously at the moment everything is subject to our quarantine rules on home soil. If you're from other places aside from the UK, you'll have to check your own national stance on that. And yes, the date from May 17th has been pushed back to July 1st, we think. However, that doesn't mean that when July 1st comes, we won't be able to go to a wide variety of places. There's many countries across the world that have actively said that they'll be willing to accept tourists as soon as possible, if not now already. So thinking relatively close to home, kind of typical holidays that you'd expect in the summer, the Turkey tourism minister has said he expects to have us in this summer, regardless of whether you've had a vaccine or not. So if you aren't sure whether to get one, or if you can't get one, that may be somewhere you can consider. And Turkey's actually become a bit of a travel hotspot in the last year or so because of their slightly lesser restrictions compared to the rest of the world. A lot of big backpacker influencers have spent a lot of time there in places such as Cappadocia. Greece has also given us a hard date for a return, which is May the 14th, providing you've been fully inoculated or vaccinated, or you've got a negative test to prove that you're safe. Seychelles in Africa is also opening its doors on March 25th, which should be today if I release the video on time, fingers crossed, if you've had the vaccine as well. So that's definitely an incentive to see somewhere a little bit off the beaten track. I don't think Africa gets as much recognition as it perhaps should do in the backpacking community, let alone the travel community entirely. Cyprus, another one fairly close to home, May 1st, no test, just need to be vaccinated. Madeira, the archipelago off of Portugal, has also announced that if you're vaccinated there will be a green corridor for you to visit the country. Obviously where that's highly connected with Portugal, I would expect the same sort of announcement to come from them very shortly, if not already by the time you see this video. Belize, also open for the vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, you need a PCR test from between 48 and 96 hours before you travel, depending on your particular situation. Poland, as you know, I visited in August. Their restrictions are pretty easy going as it was back then. So as the European vaccine drive ramps up and we do well here and they do well in their scenario, they've also said that they will be opening very soon as well. Mexico's had very little restrictions through the pandemic. One of my personal favourite countries that I've been to a number of times now, the likes of Cancun and Quintana Roo. I'd love to see Mexico City and various other places in the country. It's definitely a place I could see myself backpacking for a number of months at a time. It's also actually been reported as well, as you can see, that Mexico's had a very high influx of travel recently, naturally because of the lack of restrictions compared to the rest of the world, but that does suggest that their travel industry is picking up. So flying back to Europe, a little bit closer to home, Eastern Europe in particular, Estonia is open if you've been vaccinated and the quarantine measures are being relaxed slowly over time. And Georgia and Romania in Eastern Europe are open if you've been vaccinated as well. The fact that these little clusters in Europe are starting to open in unison does suggest that we can start thinking about backpacking in the way of interrailing or just road trips, that sort of thing. So definitely options are becoming available. But like I say, I've named about 8 or 9 there that are relatively in close proximity to each other. So that's definitely positive in my books. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to jump into a few personalised case studies that I think are going to benefit my future plans and you guys as well. Let's dive into the first one, which is Thailand. If you've seen my last video, you definitely know that I've had some big experiences in Thailand. Some good, some bad, but it's definitely in my top 5 countries I've ever been to, with a wide variety of nature, culture, city life, nightlife, you name it, it's got it, and it's definitely highly recommended by myself. So Thailand's situation is actually a lot more positive than the rest of the world, and they're doing very well given that they're not necessarily a completely developed country. They've had under 100 deaths to date, which is fantastic. Bearing in mind their population is very similar to ours at around 67, 68 million, and we've had about 120,000 plus deaths, give or take. So on the grand scheme of things, they've done a fantastic job. Thailand is currently open with hotel quarantine, so it's not really feasible right this minute unless you're planning on being there long term. So last week, the Centre for COVID Situation Administration, aka the CCSA, has actually published a roadmap, which I'll put on screen now for you to have a look at. The first big change you see is from April 1st to June 30th, the quarantine will be reduced from 14 days to 10. And as much as the news is confusing, what I've gathered from this and various other articles is that if you've been vaccinated, even in this phase of the roadmap, you will have to quarantine for only 7 days as opposed to 10. Also, within this first stage of the roadmap, you will have 2 tests in the 10-day quarantine period between the 3rd and 5th day and the 9th and 10th day. The second stage is July 1st to the end of September, in which you'll see that the vaccine rollout ramps up massively, going from 2 doses imported into 26, which has a big difference on the population of Thailand with a similar population to ours, like I just said a minute ago. However, this phase in the roadmap doesn't actually change anything quarantine-wise, but from October 1st, which is the last phase of the roadmap, all quarantine and lockdown measures will hopefully be lifted. I say that carefully, but I'd like to think they will be. This is largely due to the fact of how they've handled it so far and how they will handle it in the next 6 months. The roadmap for me indicates that I'll be able to go to Thailand October 1st, which is my new date that I'm planning to leave the country. If it is possible, that is definitely where I think I could see myself starting my travels. 6 months does sound like a long time, but it could be quicker than that because there's a lot of pressure from the tourism minister, tourism industry, hotels, big players in the game that are calling for a much earlier reopening from July 1st. The Prime Minister, forgive me if I butcher the pronunciation of his name, but Prayuth Chan-ocha has ordered to look into vaccine certificates / passports due to the industry pressure, and if that was something that would be looked into in the not so distant future, then who knows, that roadmap could be accelerated. Thailand is a developing country and is heavily dependent on tourism. In 2020 alone, they suffered a 6.1% deficit to their GDP, and the year before that, they saw 40 million tourists come into the country. Calling for a July 1st opening is about 3 months ahead of schedule. However, July is such a big summer month for the majority of the Western world. It's definitely a popular time, so if it is safe and possible for them to do that, you'd definitely like to think that they'd want to look into that. However, the official roadmap does state October 1st. The majority of the world, if not all, will be able to enter Thailand providing you're vaccinated or perhaps not. Now, I don't think this is set in stone either. However, there have been articles reporting that Thailand are considering travel bubbles in the not so distant future for countries that have a high inoculation of 70% plus. So what this means for us, because we've vaccinated so many people now, we're approaching 30 million doses administered, and the second doses will definitely be ramping up as well. If we can reach a point in time in the not so distant future where we're 70% plus done, then that's definitely something that our leaders and the Thai leaders can discuss perhaps. Overall, the more bubbles that are created, regardless of whether they're with us or not, it does bring the world together, and it means that we're one step closer to having that freedom to travel again. However, my realistic expectation is that July to October will be the likely window, based on the fact that travel bubbles could be administered and vaccines will definitely ramp up around the world. So the second case study I want to look at is Australia. Australia is quite an interesting one as well, given the fact of how well they've handled the pandemic. They've suppressed deaths, suppressed rates, and they have been a lot better than the majority of the world entirely, as have New Zealand. However, the contrary to that argument is that their vaccine rollout has been dramatically slower than ours. Their population's only around 20 million and it's a relatively dispersed population. You do have to question why they haven't done their vaccine sooner. Where does that leave us? Where does that leave our chances of a working holiday visa or just a tourism visa? When can we expect to go to Australia? The truth of the matter is, I don't have an answer as to when we're likely to be able to go to Australia. The roadmap that I could find on their official government health website has largely been completed. The current situation in Australia, as far as I'm aware from my research and conversations with close friends out there, is that their situation is largely under control and the likes of masks and social distancing are almost a distant memory, with only a requirement to wear them and enforce those sort of things on scenarios such as public transport. Despite the handling of it, they're not completely up and running in terms of domestic travel, and state-to-state travel differs between each one. If you want to find this information, you can find it on the health.gov.au website. An example of a popular place for backpackers in Australia is the state of Victoria. They're currently operating on a traffic light system, which basically means that depending on what state or territory you've come from, that affects your rules and regulations as to whether you can enter freely or not. So you can see that there's not a universal approach being taken by Australia, and everything is starting to unlock gradually over time according to each state's rules. The good news with Australia as well is that they're typically reporting single to double digit cases / deaths a day. There's been many days at a time consecutively where they've had 0 deaths at all, which is fantastic. There was a one-way trans-Tasman bubble implemented with New Zealand, which was spearheaded by the Australian leaders and Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. That hasn't been a complete success. That has been halted, restarted and restarted due to small outbreaks around the two nations. However, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand has stated that there will be more bubbles to be talked about in the near future with Australia, and the details for that should be revealed on April 6th. And Australia have spoken about potential travel bubbles coming in the near months. So Singapore is the latest one that I've seen reported in July. That looks like that's very likely to go ahead. This is likely to be countries that are geographically close to Australia or have high inoculation rates or good diplomatic and international relations with the countries. So this is interesting to me, not because I'm from any of those countries, but does that suggest there could be a loophole? If I was to be able to quarantine or be in a Singapore or a Pacific Asian country, does that mean I potentially have a route into Australia? I don't know, but it's definitely food for thought, and if that was to become an option in the near future, it would definitely be something that I and many others perhaps may consider. Now, we are at a disadvantage with a potential travel bubble with Australia due to our geographic distance. We're about as far as possibly could be from Australia. However, if they could make an air corridor due to our vaccine rates and our success with lockdowns and vaccines in the recent 2 or 3 months, is it that unrealistic to expect it? I don't think so. As much as we are in a doom and gloom lockdown lifestyle, there's no denying the rates and infections / deaths that are occurring now compared to 6 months ago. So countries may overseas look at that and say, well, they're less of a risk and we're a big tourism market. So there are incentives to start letting us in sooner than other countries. The international travel ban for Australia has been extended to June currently. I don't think it will be done and dusted by June. I don't think we'll really be able to expect to be on Australian soil this year. I think January is probably a relatively fair enough expectation to see our friends down under. A lot can change in a very short space of time, and if large parts of the world are starting to get vaccinated, it's inevitable that the doors will start to open. Naturally, I will be following the situation very closely as it is very central to my travel and life plan. So any big announcements I will keep you informed of. If you want to keep informed of my immediate updates to my life, best place to catch me is on Instagram, which is ruck_travels. Any big move I make with travelling or videos will definitely be there, so give that a follow so you can keep informed. So the last case study I'm going to talk about is Europe on the whole. It is frustrating to hear that they have halted the vaccine drive in different parts of Europe, but it is the right thing to do. Any concern with the vaccine should be investigated thoroughly and safely, and the more they do that and prove its safety, the sooner it will get back up and running. It's never going to be a smooth drive, and we need to stay positive and realise that although it won't be going perfectly at times, we are getting there, and every time someone gets an injection, we are getting one step closer to the free world that we used to know and love. I think Europe's a very interesting case as well, along with other first world areas of the world, purely because once we have vaccinated people, which we will sooner than the third world because of our infrastructure and facilities, you'd like to think that we would turn our heads and help the third world. The more that we can share, help out, deliver vaccines and set things up for them in other countries, the sooner we can bring different clusters of the world together and be able to travel with less restrictions and less worries and concerns. Obviously, this is down to political factors and international relations with said countries. With the announcements I noted earlier with various countries in Europe saying they will be able to welcome us very soon, and low-cost airlines such as Ryanair and EasyJet allowing you to book flights, this does help shape up our summers. The reason I mention this broad selection of countries is because it applies to so many of us. You know, Greece, for example, looks to be somewhere that's a little bit more lax in terms of their restrictions and letting people in. They are looking to get tourists in ASAP. Greece is a very interesting one in the sense that if you saw my previous video, you'll see that I've done various holidays to Greece in places such as Corfu, Kos and Mykonos, other Greek islands. So you've got different groups of people. You've got people that are our sort of age, that are looking to do party holidays or couples holidays. You've also got other parts of the island for resorts, for all-inclusive holidays, for families and big groups of people at a time. And you have got Athens, which has a very deep historical culture embedded in it, so definitely would appeal to the likes of the backpacker community, for example. I think these announcements are definitely fair. I don't think I've been biased. I think it's definitely positive. There is a lot of doom and gloom, and it is very difficult to avoid the bad news. However, there is good news out there. You've just got to look for it and try and be balanced and try and be optimistic. It is only a matter of time until we get there. Every bad day is one step closer to the good days. If the reopening of countries as well is successful, more will follow suit, providing they have the criteria and facilities to do that. And we will see a return of the free world. It may not be tomorrow or the next day, but it will be in the not too distant future. Before I finish, I'd like to extend my thank you and appreciation for helping me reach 100 subs and surpass 100 subs. It's a very small milestone, but it means a big deal to me and everyone involved. I'm very grateful for, and hopefully it's the start of something very special. As you know, ways that help the channel help me are liking the video, leaving your thoughts in the comments below and subscribing, but also spread the word to family and friends. If you think there's someone out there right now that needs some good news or something to look forward to, whether it be a holiday or the hope and optimism of a holiday, maybe recommend this video to them just to help them out as well. Or anyone you know that's interested in travel and may get something out of this content, please send them my way as well. Despite things being a bit unpredictable at the moment, I do think things are looking up. But I want to know what you lot think. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, whether they're good, bad or ugly. And in the meantime, I'll see you on the next one. Peace.